Our next speaker, Bringing History to Life, speech number 5, Storytelling Manual. The title is Silent Service of the U.S. Navy. Let us never forget. This will be Carolyn Blossel. She didn't put her name in here, so I luckily know it. It's going to be 6 to 8 minutes.
6 or 8 to 10.
Oh, I thought it was going to be 8 to 10, but you changed it to 6 to 8.
Yeah, it's only 6 to 8.
She changed it. Well, originally it was going to be 15, and then it went down to 7 to 9, and now it's 6 to 8.
It's even better.
Come on up, Carolyn.
Somehow the theme of Japan is happening today, but I'm going from a historical perspective because that is what my story is to be about today. Let's go back to December 6th, 1941. What happened on that day? Does anybody remember? It was Pearl Harbor, the bombing on Pearl Harbor, and the beginning of the American war with Imperial Japan. An important part of the winning of that war against Imperial Japan had to do with the silent service. Does anyone know what the silent service is? The submarines. The submarines were a huge part of America winning that war with Imperial Japan. It just so happens that not many people are accepted to serve in the submarine duty of the United States Navy. In this case, in World War II, it was the most dangerous duty of any of the branches of the military. In fact, 1 out of 5 that served in that submarine duty didn't return. 3,600 sailors, nearly 1 in 5 that served in those diesel submarines never returned home. Martin Sheridan happened to be a war correspondent during World War II and was the only correspondent that was able to be allowed on an active duty diesel submarine. He was able to be on the USS Bullhead. It just so happens that the USS Bullhead is the last submarine that was lost and presumed gone at the end of World War II. His record of that USS Bullhead is the last record we have of a submarine of underwater silent service in the USS Navy. He says of those 84 men that were on that submarine, he says and describes them the following: most gallant of sailors. They were audacious, defiant, and stubbornly aggressive men. What's also very impressive about this silent service, they volunteered. You might wonder, what exactly is the duty of a submarine during a wartime? In World War II, of those submarines, first of all, 52 never returned. They rescued over 520 American soldiers who went down on enemy waters. They were the rescuers of those 520 airmen. They also were able, because of their periscopes, take pictures of the landing on those islands for the soon-to-be-coming invading troops. They were able to help prepare them for those invasions. They also destroyed many of the supply ships to the Japanese army. It was July 31st, 1945, when James Ralph Jensen received his call to serve on the USS Bullhead. He was excited. It was leaving from the port of Fremantle, Australia. And having been born and raised in Oakland, California, he'd never been to Australia before. So this was an adventure, an exciting adventure. In fact, he wasn't really supposed to be on that submarine that day. But his orders had gotten changed just 3 weeks before the USS Bullhead set sail. Its responsibility was to patrol the waters in the Java Sea. They set sail August 2nd and partnered up with one of the other submarines from the Dutch crew, because U.S. at that time were friends with the military from the Dutch community, and they traded mail so that the sailors aboard the Bullhead could get their love letters back to Fremantle, Australia, and back home to America to let their families know where they were. Because as the silent service, there's very little contact with the submarines with anyone else. Families don't know where they are, they don't know when they're leaving, and they certainly don't know when they're coming home. In this case, a bulletin was sent out for all ships to come back to the Fremantle port. All submarines were heard from, except for the USS Bullhead. A telegram was sent to the families with this written documentation. James Ralph Jensen, electrician's third mate, third class, the USS Naval Reserves, is missing in action in the service of his country. Your great anxiety is appreciated and will be furnished details when received. To prevent hostilities, to aid to our enemies, and to safeguard the lives of others presumed lost, please do not divulge the name or the place or discuss publicly the fact that he is missing. Signed by the Vice Admiral Randall Jacobs, Chief of Naval Personnel. As others were celebrating the end of World War II, this was the story of my mother-in-law receiving this telegram. As others were rejoicing that the war had come to an end, there was no news of her brother, her only brother. For over 2 years, the family waited, hoping to hear what might have become of him. In fact, her father started an insurance agency. You may not know this, but Japanese Americans in California were whisked off at this time to internment camps, some being here in Utah. So the feeling towards the Japanese, even though they were Japanese Americans, was not positive. It was found out later that the submarine USS Bullhead was sunk by Japanese enemy plane. 2 depth charges, record of the oil bubbling to the surface. But still, there was no hatred or animosity in my mother-in-law's family to the Japanese. 64 years later, my son meets a fellow retired Navy commander, tells him about his service on the USS submarine that he was on. My son connects with that idea, joins the Navy, becomes a member of one of the largest U.S. submarines in the fleet, the USS Kentucky. This summer, he'll retire from the Navy, having served 8 years as a nuclear mechanic, serving as his great-uncle did 64 years ago. This July 4th, let us remember those who served, those who never came home, and those who sacrificed everything for our freedoms.